Present.
Mr. Mitchell.
Present.
Mr. McGlade.
Present.
Mr. Arthur.
Here.
Ms. Hudak.
Here.
Mr. Steyer.
Present. And as you are able, please rise with me as we observe a moment of silence. Please join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before us now is the approval of our agenda. Is there a motion?
Yeah, I can move approval of the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, the motion before us is the approval of this evening's agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Same sign. And our agenda has been approved. Now before us is the approval of our minutes from the work session and our regular business meeting of October 27th. Do we have a motion?
And regular business meeting of October 27th, 2020.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, before us now is a resolution to approve our minutes of previous meetings. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Same sign. And the resolution has been approved. Now before us is a public participation. This is an opportunity for the public to address board items or any items of concern. We have three individuals who have requested ahead of the meeting to speak to the board. First up, we have Ms. Sherry Anderson, followed by, next we'll go, I believe it's Tay Reeves, and then Julie, is it Borwick? Will be the third. So each individual who requested ahead of time will have 5 minutes, and we'll give you a 1-minute notice. Anybody who wishes to address afterwards will then have 3 minutes. So the floor is yours.
Good afternoon.
Good
I'm
afternoon.
Sherry Anderson. I'm the president of CBEA. I teach 6th grade at Kern Middle School, and I also teach an elective Game of Life. Since the last school board meeting where we made a presentation, several of our members have reached out to me and wanted me to present and ask some more questions. So the first thing is, every single teacher appreciated having Monday as a work day to get work done with no meetings until PD. I have heard an outpouring. I hope you have heard an outpouring of people appreciating that also. So now we want more. So we would like to ask for the first Monday of every month, starting in January, to be a day where kids have purposeful, meaningful work at home virtually, and we have unstructured work time in our classrooms and then PD like normal. Please consider that. It would be very well received. So, okay, then the next thing they're asking or talking to me about is the sub issue, which I know Gary's going to talk about. Since the last school board meeting, there's been a list created or built on, that maybe it was created, of teachers throughout the district who aren't classroom teachers but are being able to be used as subs. So, we want more. For example, today at Kern, there was a group of administrators and coaches who spent the day walking through looking at math, which is totally fine in a normal year, but we are in a pandemic and we were missing a whole lot of subs. So we were wondering why they were walking through watching math when they could be helping out subbing. And please don't misunderstand. When I say administration, I am not talking about principals. No one wants their principal put on a list to go sub in another building. If the principals cover classes in their own buildings, I mean, that's welcome, obviously. But, I mean, I think that what I'm hearing is the questions are there more people who work for the district that are qualified to sub that should be put on the rotation that are not? So, Gary will probably address this. And then the last thing people are asking me about is the positivity rates. And I know, and Dr. Murillo has shared, that the reason secondary went back in full was because the virtual kids, it was bad for them, and they were not passing. The failing rate was bad. But people are pointing out to me that hybrid was kind of working at the secondary schools. So if the numbers are big and we're having trouble getting subs, maybe that's something we should petition. I don't know. This is being brought up to me, so I'm bringing it up to you. My personal opinion is the hybrid was all right, because I did get to see them every other day, and they were pretty much getting into the routine. But I'm not going to speak to elementary, because I hear from both sides of elementary where having all the kids in the classroom is not safe because they're messy elementary kids. But on the other hand, having them in the classroom is great because they're all there and you can. So I'm just bringing up what people are telling me. And the last thing is, I got several letters from people who are directly impacting students as early reading interventionists that have been put on the sub-rotation. So they are assigned right now to get groups of 8 groups or more of kids all day long in their elementary schools. And they're the neediest kids who need the most help, and they're being sent to sub. I'm talking out of both sides, because we need more subs, but not these subs. So that's where we are. My solution is keep those people in the classroom and send people who aren't directly involved with students to sub, so that we keep the procedures we have in place that are successful, and then we deal with the sub situation. So I appreciate this meeting. I appreciate that we're going to hear from Gary. I appreciate the information that you get from Gary every day. I wonder if I could see it, because that's interesting. But if it is possible for teachers to have an extra day per month starting in January, that would be very helpful. Thank you for your time and listening to me tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Kay Reeves.
Hi, sorry, I'm a little nervous. This is my first time being up here and participating into a board meeting, so thank you
You're
all
among
for having
friends,
me.
so
I would just first like to thank you guys again for having me, and I want to thank the teachers. As a parent, I cannot tell you how much it meant to me to be able to speak with my teacher at parent-teacher conference and know that they were rooting us on for the hybrid parents, and knowing that their parents were backing them. That was very important, and we had really good conversations with parent-teacher conferences. Sorry, let me find my place. COVID has made an absolute mess of this past year. I think we can all agree on that. And I agree that kids need to be in school for so many reasons. Education, emotional, mental, physical, and social stability being the most important. That being said, I would ask that you guys consider maybe going back to virtual for a time being, and we rethink our plan of action. I'm going to read off some statements from parents, staff members that couldn't be here, and even my own children who've talked to me about their frustration with their day-to-day activities. Students are being put in lunchrooms in combined classes because we are short-staffed. Our teachers and subs are gone. Principals, paras, and counselors are being made to sub in those classrooms. Principals and staff members do not feel supported by the board members. I'm afraid to say anything because I will lose my job. Kids aren't wearing masks. It's sad that parents are led to believe that their kids are being protected and the CDC guidelines are being followed or enforced. My wife works for the Council Bluffs Community School District. She said 15 kids were sent home the other day, but no one I talked to knew anything about it. Teachers are allowed to work if they test positive, as long as they wear masks and aren't showing symptoms. I am so frustrated with school because I don't know what I'm going to be doing every day. These are just some of the comments I have heard, and so many more I could tell you about tonight. The most heartbreaking thing I think I heard was at the last board meeting, though, when a teacher told you that their family life was suffering, how they were missing out on spending time with their kids, how their mental and emotional health was suffering as well. I don't envy any one of you for the positions you've been put in, as you have to make the difficult decision of whether to stay open or not, and how that decision will affect hundreds of families throughout the district. But I can tell you this, after hearing and seeing the things that have been said, I have lost confidence in the school board's ability to be transparent. And I have lost faith that we are doing what's best for the kids as of this moment. The kids do need to be in school. They do so much better when they can attend a structured environment for their education. I just fail to see how that has been happening over the last few months since we've opened. I think with rising numbers, not only in our community, but in our schools, we need to take a time out, close down and rethink how best to serve our community, but more importantly, how best to serve the educational needs of our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Julie.
Thank you for the opportunity to come and talk. I am actually here on behalf of a whole lot of parents in our district and a whole lot of teachers. There are a lot of parents out there that are concerned. Again, what she said, I did not have time to write the numbers down, but hearing of classrooms that are having multiple kids sent home, and a lot of us, including myself, do not feel that we're all being told the truth. I've heard things from bus drivers. I know of bus drivers that are getting sick because kids refuse to keep their masks on the bus. Teachers are crying out for you guys to listen. I worked in this district. I know what it's like to not be listened to. I hear their cries, and honestly, I take it personally. They should not be afraid to come here and talk to you. They should not be afraid of losing their home life, their health. They're crying out to you. You guys need to listen. We don't need dead teachers. We don't need teachers having mental breakdowns. It's not okay. And the amount of kids that are homesick is not okay. And something needs to happen for everybody. I don't hear a whole lot said about the bus drivers, but I know several that have COVID. Who's going to be driving our buses to get our kids back and forth safe? Does anybody even care about them? Seriously. There needs to be a wake-up call, or there's going to be a loud rumble from the parents. You guys work for us. It's our kids in the school. The last thing I have to say, if I get COVID, I have a severe immune problem. I left this district on disability because of the stress level. I ended up at the Mayo Clinic. If I get it, the doctors have already told me it's going to be bad. Are you going to be the one that tells my son his mom's dead? Because they already told me I wouldn't make it. Or are you going to put that off on Diane?
Are there any other individuals who wish to address the board?
Hi, guys. Got cold again on us, didn't it? Ryan Bott. I think I know most people here. Just come tonight to ask when enough is enough regarding COVID in our school district. Potawatomi County has a 14-day positive case average of 19.2%. There have been 4,189 positive cases, 2,910 recoveries, and 51 deaths. The numbers that we are provided on the district website are far from accurate. As a district, numbers are neither correctly gathered, or I would hate to think falsified. Upon researching districts that match our district's approximate size in states that have a positivity rate the same as ours, I was unable to find one single district with less than 1% of students and staff infected, as we say our district is. When our school year began, the decision was widely made to begin in the hybrid mode. Along the way, we have decided to go back to full classes at the parents' discretion. Since then, cases have exploded. My purpose in speaking tonight is to bring to the attention of the board the condition our teachers and staff face during these times. Our teachers during a normal school year do not have the time to plan, implement, and follow through with teaching the curriculum, yet this year they are asked to do even more. I asked, were teachers given the prerogative or a voice when it came to returning to full-size classes? Sure, they were given signs in front of their homes and gift baskets, but honestly, how insincere is that? What teachers need, especially now with our numbers rising out of control, is the ability to feel safe in their profession as relates to their health and the health of their families. Just today at College View Elementary, there were 23 staff members absent. While I understand some of these absences were not due to COVID, some were. I can only reasonably deduct that schools all over the district are dealing with the same staffing issues. It's clear there's not enough subs in our district, as classes must be combined, which in turn puts our students and teachers and paras at even greater risk of COVID. I humbly ask the board to consider returning to the hybrid model or virtual models until the new year to slow the spread in our community. I also ask that all sports, clubs, and extracurricular activities be put on hold until these numbers decrease. Schools are the backbone of our community, and teachers are the most important cog in that wheel. It's time our district puts the staff's needs, their health, and our community needs first during these unprecedented times. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any other individuals? Seeing no one move to the podium, we will move forward with our meeting. This brings us to our superintendent's report. Dr. Murillo, would you lead us through this portion of the meeting?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kozar. At this time, I'd like to invite Ms. Ostrowski to the podium to present on the American Education Week.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So next week is American Education Week. It's an annual celebration of everything that has to do with our public schools. We typically take an opportunity here in our district to celebrate you as board members and the role you play in advancing student achievement. And so the superintendent and us as cabinet members are presenting you with a little gift box tonight. But more importantly, it includes gifts from the schools. They're masks. Imagine that, masks from the different schools with their logos. So we hope that you enjoy wearing those. There's also a little cookie treat in there commemorating the American Education Week. And Dr. Murillo, you put a special surprise in there for them as well in the pins. So
Nice lapel pin for the year. So thank you, Ms. Ostrowski, and thank each one of you board members for what you do and the time that you give to serve and support our school district and this community. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Corey Vorthman to the podium to do our presentation on student achievement. This month, we will be presenting on the class of 2020 post-secondary enrollment.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It's my pleasure tonight to provide the board with an update on the class of 2020 and the post-secondary enrollment data from that class. Before we begin tonight, I do want to take a few moments and at least acknowledge the circumstances are certainly changed this year from what they typically have been when I have brought you this report in the past. Based on current news headlines, it's not surprising that we see across the nation a stark decrease in the amount of students who chose to pursue post-secondary education this fall. A lot of data suggested that perhaps students would maybe stay closer to home or would not even go to school rather than enroll in online education. As many of our traditional brick and mortar post-secondary institutions instituted either a hybrid plan or an online only plan or some version thereof. So the data that I'm going to talk about tonight comes from an organization called the National Student Clearinghouse. And the National Student Clearinghouse is a national nonprofit organization that collects data from about 3,600 post-secondary institutions, both private and public across the United States, comprising about 99% of all students who attend post-secondary institutions. So it's a very reputable and reliable source for us to be able to track how our students do in post-secondary when they leave our doors. So according to the Student Clearinghouse this year, we did see a significant drop nationally in the percentage of students who decided to attend post-secondary institutions for the first time following high school. In fact, first-time fall enrollment in post-secondary education fell 16% nationally this year. And that was the largest decrease that the Clearinghouse had noted since their founding. More specifically, two-year schools felt the impact even more. Community college enrollment for first-time enrollment is down 22% nationally. And the reason I bring these numbers to you is to put into context some of the data that we locally are looking at, not only for the class of 2020, but for the institutions that they chose this fall. So as you recall, we set a couple of benchmarks in the academic plan around post-secondary attainment. Specifically, our goal to make post-secondary attainment inescapable for all students in Council Bluffs. And there were two measures that we were working toward improving as part of that academic plan. The first was to increase the post-secondary enrollment rate by 11% by 2020, which would put us to around 60% this year. The second metric that we were working on was increasing degree completion rates and increasing them by 7% to 2020. And that would be for the class of 2014. So the data tonight I'm going to share certainly does not match those goals. We were on a trajectory to hit those goals, but unfortunately we are reporting a 9% decrease for the class of 2020 when compared to the class of 2019 for post-secondary enrollment. So the chart you're seeing up here, the yellow line, is basically about 8 years worth of data that the Clearinghouse allows us to track. You'll notice that we had a nice consistent line going, and we've had 2 years of decreases. Most notably, and aligned with what we saw nationally, the line in the middle, the kind of orange colored line represents 2-year or community college enrollment. And that decreased for the first time to 26%. And we had seen all-time high enrollment in the class of 2019. Interestingly, compared to last year, 4-year enrollment stayed relatively consistent, which certainly could be a point of celebration. We also did some analysis and looked at equity in terms of how our subgroups were represented in post-secondary enrollment in the class of 2020. So you'll notice that on this chart, the teal bar is the percent that subgroup made up of that class of 2020 cohort. And the yellow bar represents the percent of students attending post-secondary enrollment this fall. So one thing you'll notice is that a national trend that the Clearinghouse identified this year was a dramatic drop nationally in the percentage of males who chose to go to post-secondary this year. And our data matches what we saw nationally. We would expect that females would be slightly higher than males in terms of post-secondary enrollment because they make up a larger proportion of the class of 2020, about a 4% difference. If you look at our racial subgroups, you can see that they are pretty consistent, making up about the same proportion of their class as they do going on to post-secondary. In fact, all of our subgroups are within 2 percentage points of their respective cohort. So unfortunately for the class of 2020, we did not meet our goal of getting to 60% by 2020. And it's certainly not a goal that we're not going to continue working on. I imagine that you will continue to see a renewed focus on that in the next iteration of the academic plan that looks forward. When we look at where students ended up this fall, it's no surprise that our most frequent institution is Iowa Western Community College. But interestingly, when we look at how this compares to previous school years, you'll notice that the top institutions after Iowa Western all have one thing in common. They are all close to home. So that's the first time that we've seen this phenomenon happen, where we didn't see a number of students end up going to other institutions that were either farther. The University of South Dakota usually is on this list, or Northwest Missouri State is on this list. This is the first time that we saw that our top institutions after Iowa Western were University of Iowa, Iowa State, UNO, and for the first time College of St. Mary, which we hadn't seen in the past. However, like the national trend, this is a decrease actually in the percentage of students who decided to attend Iowa Western. So the class of 2019 represented roughly 2/3 of all students pursuing post-secondary institutions started their college career at Iowa Western. And this year we saw a slight dip, about 7% decrease in post-secondary enrollment at Iowa Western. Still a very strong number, considering that almost 2/3 of all of our students who pursue post-secondary start or go to Iowa Western Community College, which is why we continue to work so hard to build on the great partnership that we have with Iowa Western Community College, to continue to align programs and build new programs that help our kids have a seamless transition between our two high schools and Iowa Western so that they are successful in post-secondary institutions. When we look at the percentage of students who went to school in 2019 and then came back in 2020, we call that the persistence rate, or the percentage of students who returned for a second year. And remarkably, this has remained relatively consistent and even strong in spite of the pandemic. When we see numbers here that range around 70%, we are hitting at or near the national average for persistence. You'll notice that we had a nice bounce in the 4-year persistence rate, and our second-year persistence rate has maintained itself consistently from year to year. And the last data point I want to share with you tonight is our post-secondary degree completion rate. And unfortunately, this chart is a little bit misleading. The data that the Clearinghouse gives us is a 6-year snapshot of how students do in terms of progress toward completing a degree. Unfortunately, life happens for many of our students, whether that is they decide to take a year off, they transfer to different institutions, they change a major, there's financial aid implications, or we have something like a pandemic happen. And in fact, the 4-year degree is becoming somewhat of a myth, because fewer and fewer students nationally are actually completing a 4-year degree in 4 years. So even though this data shows that we had a fall off of about 4% in terms of the students who completed in 6 years, what is encouraging is that we are still seeing kids hanging in there for that 7th and 8th year. And as I put an asterisk by this data point this year, because even though the class of 2014 currently has a 23% degree completion rate, there are still about 6% of kids in that cohort that are still enrolled in school in year 7. And so that makes me optimistic that we can convert those kids into degree completers in the next 2 years and add them to our data set. This is a lagging indicator. So when you think of all of the things that we have done in the past 5 years around post-secondary attainment, Potawatomi Promise, our TradeWorks program, ECA, all of these things help contribute to students going to school, persisting through school, and completing school. But we only have data up through the class of 2014. So it's going to take us a while to see the results of that hard work. Obviously, enrollment helps us project that. Persistence helps us project that. But this is the target that we really want to move, is those kids who are able to earn that certificate, that diploma, that degree, and then move into meaningful employment that enhances their quality of life. That's why we're doing this work. So with that, I would pause and welcome any questions that the board might have tonight.
Questions from the board? I think we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vorthman. Now we'll move into our informational presentations. At this time, we will have a report by Mr. Gary Milbourne on our teacher on call and substitute strategies. Mr. Milbourne, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. As well advertised, I'm here to provide an overview of Teachers on Call tonight, the staffing company we hired to fill our vacancies this year, as well as provide an overview of our current and past needs for substitutes. Before we get into that data, I'd like to present the scope of the challenge a little bit. If you look at any of the news or the national headlines, you'll see things like this. This is from New York in September. Substitute teacher shortages loom as the school year begins. This is from Kentucky in October. Pandemic contributes to existing substitute teacher shortage. See, this is from Kansas City at the end of October. Substitute teacher shortage causing a big problem for many districts. This is from Wisconsin. We're in a constant struggle. Pandemic adds to substitute teacher shortage in schools. A national blog from last week, America faces substitute teacher shortage. Disadvantaged schools are hit the hardest. And then just last week in Lincoln, lack of substitute, one of the most vexing problems for schools of the pandemic. And I would agree with that headline. So when we think about absences, I just want you to maybe jot down on a piece of scratch paper or in your mind's eye, think about how many absences do you think occur in a school year. Just kind of pick a number in your head. And I'm saying tonight we're talking about our certified teacher group. So I'm not talking about all staff. I'm just thinking about certified teachers. Providing a little wait time for my days. Okay. So here's our data from our last 3 years, and our 17-18 data is very similar. So the certified group in 18-19 had well over 10,000 absences. Last year, over 7,000 absences. And reminder, last year was the year of the closure, so there's about 2 months of data missing there. So probably would have been close to that 10,000 mark. And then this year, 6,415. So it begins to paint the picture of need in increased absences. However, all of that group do not require a substitute. So you have to drill down on that data a little bit more and see who requires a substitute. So you can see here in 18-19, 8,000 of those requests were for a substitute. Well over 5,000 last year in the shortened year requested a substitute. And then this year we're at 4,536 requested a substitute. So we value, or I guess our achievement is in the fill rate. We always talk about the fill rate. And so we set our goals around a fill rate. So if you look at the fill rate this year, you will see that 16% drop. So we average about an 85% fill rate. 2017's not up there, but it was the same. We would have been close to averaging that last year as well, and you can see that we're down to 68% this year. And we know that's very concerning. As a former principal, I know the stress it puts on the building and puts on the teachers. One thing, today our HR specialist was in Ed Weekly, which is a national magazine and blog, and they did a national poll, and they stated out today that the average fill rate across the United States for substitutes is 54%. One positive I think you might be able to see in that data is that number of over 3,000 fills. So we've filled 3,000 absences this year. So if you compare that to 18-19, we're almost halfway there of how many we filled. But the requests have gone up, and so our fill rate's going down, right? And so, like I said, we are not proud of 68, and we're not going to rest on our laurels, but we are proud that we've filled 3,000 absences thus far this year. Another piece of data I think is helpful just is to look at a time stamp, so a marker of time. And so if you look at November 10th, so beginning of the school year to November 10th in the previous 4 years, you'll see that the previous years were around that 1,800 range of requests for substitute, and this year we're at the 4,536. And you might be saying, is all this due to COVID? And I would say COVID has definitely amplified the challenges schools across the nation were already having finding substitutes. And so if you look at that pie chart up in the left-hand side, you see that COVID related and that remote teaching. That's when teachers can teach while out in quarantine at 19%. Those are absolutely COVID. If you look at that sick self, that's a pretty large number, and that's a lot of people acting with caution. Where in the past, I might have had a sore throat and I reported to work. This year, we're not reporting to work. We're getting that stop sign. We might be going and get a test. And so many of that, a large portion of that sick self might be related to COVID or precautionary acts due to COVID as well. Same thing with sick family in FMLA there's slivers of that could be related to COVID as well. So when we started talking about our return to learn plan in last spring, that's probably about the time I started getting my ulcer, because I was really worried about staffing as we all were. And we knew we were going to need some kind of comprehensive plan to work through this year and navigate this year. And so when we did the return to learn plan, I think in late July, there was a substitute plan in there. We vowed to you that we were going to stay nimble and flexible. In October, we reconfigured that plan a little bit and added more compensation for teachers because we saw teachers were covering more, so we redefined that and kind of beefed up that compensation piece. And then the last few weeks, we had to pivot again, and we've really landed on this 4-tier comprehensive plan. Tier 1 substitute, Tier 2 building coverage, Tier 3 that specialist coverage, and Tier 4 that district-wide coverage. So I'm going to talk about those tiers in a minute, but I'm going to go into Tier 1 first here, which relates to teachers on call. So teachers on call, just a quick overview. They're part of Kelly Services, which is one of the largest staffing companies in the country. 1,700 school partners, over 500,000 placements annually, 1,200 active substitutes, and 20 years in the staffing substitute business. And many people have asked me, why did we do it this year? And I would say that answer is probably twofold. One, going into the pandemic, we knew there was going to be a substitute shortage, that people would choose not to return to the profession of being a substitute. And we knew we needed a strategy beyond our traditional approach that the couple people in my office could do. So we knew we needed something to go above and beyond in a dedicated service with the sole purpose of filling our substitutes is very enticing. And with that 3,000 fills right now, once again, I'm not saying it's a success, but we're making gains there. The other piece would be how my team, the human resources team, the supports we're providing to the district are a lot different. I won't put a number on this graph because it changes every day, but I would say anywhere from 65 to 90% of my team's work every single day is COVID related. That work, those supports that we're providing to our employees did not exist last year. And that looks like navigating the daily symptom survey, verifying test dates, verifying their first symptom dates, answering return to work questions, interpreting and applying the Family First Coronavirus Response Act leave for employees, facilitating the accommodation process, organizing and supporting contact tracing, which our buildings have done a wonderful job of, and our contact tracers work long weekend hours and night hours to do that. So I just want to say thank you to them publicly. Filing the COVID documentation and then calibrating with the health department and on CDC guidance. And we are proud to provide those supports. It's just new work for us, and we are proud of that we've kept people safe, and the numbers are so low in our district. So in June, before we had even considered Teachers on Call, because Teachers on Call kind of got into our radar in July, we surveyed our substitutes. We had 222 substitutes in our pool. And I'll preface that by saying if you're in our pool, that means you worked one day that year. So it could just be someone who's worked one day. And out of those 222, 102 substitutes said they were going to return this year. So when we saw that data, that's also when we started looking for outside assistance. So currently we have 122 subs in our system. And we've set some clear benchmarks with Teachers on Call. By the end of January, we'd like to increase that by 30 to 152. And by the end of the year, we'd like to increase that to 182, which would be about 84 new hires. Our previous last 3 years in the data, our team is average. Our range has been anywhere from 30 to 60 hires. So this is much higher than our regular average. Obviously, we need more, so the goal needs to be higher than our average. So how are we going to do that in conjunction with TOC? Starts with recruiting. Our TOC teams attended multiple job fairs. My team's even attending some job fairs. We're reaching out to retirees. We sent emails. We sent a letter. Previous substitutes, we're going to keep going back to them and say, even though many of them indicated, I just want to wait till spring to see what happens. It was kind of a sentiment. We're going to keep reaching out to them, college students, mid-year graduates, and community organizations. Then advertising, social media blitz, physical blitz with banners, yard signs, advertisements in magazines, newspaper, things like that. Incentivize, we are willing to pay for people to get their sub authorization. So if they will work 10 days for us, we will pay for their sub authorization license. We started advertising that. We're going to connect with a few of the colleges that offer that authorization class and get that material in front of them. We've incentivized Friday pay. Fridays seem to be our large day of absences. Don't seem to be, it is our large day of absences. And starting last Friday, we increased the rate on Friday, so between now and the winter. There's a referral program that TOC has, so if one of their substitutes refers another substitute, then they get a bonus. And then we're working with TOC, they have a full-time trainer. And so their trainer is going to offer more professional development on specifically around Google Classroom and Google Meet. Because another indicator of why substitutes want to return was the technology was kind of made them hesitant. And then lastly, moving forward, just being very strategic. We're trying to place building substitutes. Right now we have 5 building substitutes, so that just means there's a substitute in that building. If there's any vacancies, that person can fill in. We have 3 more in place to be slotted by winter break. So that would put us at 8. We'll continue to work on that. We need to continue examining non-essential leave at the moment, and I've worked with the Labor Management Committee on that. And then the tier plan I'm going to talk about next. So when we think about that tier plan, I like to think of layers. And so, you know, when you're cold, you put a sweatshirt on, that's your first layer. Then at night, maybe you put your sheet on, that's another layer. Then you put your blanket on, that's another layer. And so you think about these different layers. Tier 1's our subs. Tier 2 is our building coverage. Tier 3, which we really just started in full force last week with a predictable schedule. It's those specialists from ESC and central office that are going in, and we're dictating what the highest needs are and with the buildings that have the most strain, and we're trying to dictate them to go there. And then that tier 4 would be a district-wide approach where we are prioritizing universal core, right? Where core is the most important thing to our kids, or we're going to lose a generation of learners, it feels like. And so we are moving people from other positions to help us deliver that core. Building coverage, our teachers have been under a lot of stress and done a lot of hard work and done a lot of great work in covering. Here's some average numbers based on some data. The range I'd show you there, we have a teacher who is covered twice all the way to a teacher who's covered 33 times. So that's a significant range. If you look at averages, obviously an average is an average. Some people are going to be higher, some people are going to be lower. The averages work out there. And we really want to increase that fill rate so we can try to take that building coverage down. I will say some schools, they work within their own culture. So some schools have a lot of teachers that volunteer to do that. Some don't. Most schools have a rotation, so they're trying not to tap the same person on the shoulder every day, but that doesn't always happen. Sometimes they do get tapped every day. That tier 2 support, or excuse me, tier 3, there's that predictable schedule. So if you're teacher A, you know you're up on Monday, it's most likely right now with where our numbers are that you would be subbing that one time that week. As Dr. Vorthman mentioned earlier today, we might need to look at that more. And in tier 4, we've added more teachers into that rotation. So with that, I just have a couple closing items. I want to say, one, thank you to substitutes, if any of them are watching. The over 3,000 days that they have subbed has been really important to our kids and our teachers and our mission. So thank you to them. I want to say thank you to our teachers. I know the stress it puts them under, and I want to acknowledge the hard work that they've done in really being selfless and making sure that instruction and universal instruction is the most important thing in our schools. And last thing, I want to say thank you to our paraeducators. I like to call the paraeducators a Swiss Army knife of our buildings because they kind of do everything. And they've been impacted by this too, and they've covered duties and they've done all kinds of things, and that group is very, very important to us, so I want to thank them. And lastly, I would just say, you know, it takes a village. And anybody listening to this, and anybody you know, if you know anybody who wants to make a positive impact in our community, ask them to sub. Whether it's 1 day a week, whether it's 1 day a month, whether it's 2 days a month, we will take them, and I guarantee they will find it rewarding. And it's probably one of the most important things we can do so we don't lose this generation of learners moving forward. And with that, I would take any questions.
Questions from the board? Jill?
I'll dive in first. Yeah, I do have a few questions. First of all, thank you very much, Gary, for all the information. in your presentation, can you just clarify, there was a lot of the action plans?
Yeah.
It seemed like a lot of those were focused about what the district was gonna do. For me, moving to teachers on call was one of those votes I struggled with greatly. And I also feared the amount of substitute teachers we were gonna be short and thought that that was our best way to go. And again, I don't know if it's how the slide is presented. Seems like it's a lot of what we are doing. What is teachers on call for the amount of money that we've contracted out of them? What are they doing to increase?
I would say 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would just also add to that, even though my team's supports for the district are now focused on COVID, I feel personally responsible when there's not enough subs.
Yeah.
And I can't just sit here and say teachers on call is doing it. And so we have to ask, I have to jump in and do it. And that's my team's attitude, and that's why we're here.
No, absolutely, and I agree. It's gonna take everybody working together to increase the amount that's coming in. You also mentioned that we had when you pooled the subs of the 222, 102 of them said that they were planning to return in the fall, and that was in the spring. That was prior to us making that decision to moving on teachers on call. I guess I'm questioning that move. Did all 102 go? Did some say, I don't want to work for a staffing agency?
Yeah. So we surveyed them all, but we sent them a TOC survey on top of that.
Yeah.
So even if they said they weren't returning, I sent it to them, and maybe they would change their mind. And so within that, there's a little bit of cross-reference now. There were 3 people for sure that said, I don't want to work for a staffing agency. And there were, multiple people that said, I don't want to sub because of COVID. There's multiple people in there that got permanent positions either within our district or somewhere else. So, but there was few. And TOC, I think I mentioned that when we talked about the transition in July, but TOC said we will lose some in the transition.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess if it was, a small number, that's a good thing to know.
It is,
so
it is.
That makes me feel a little bit better about that decision to move to them. And I don't want to hog all the questions. I do have a few. Can you talk a little bit about, I was taken back a little bit by the public participation session earlier tonight and the amount that it was referenced of teachers covering multiple classes and moving into gyms and things of that nature. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. I can't sit here and say I don't think a class has ever moved into a gym or they combine that, because when it gets down to that, the reality, buildings have to do what they do. I would say it's not the norm, and it's not happening. We're covering more than we're doing that. Okay. And if we have to do that for a period, at least those kids are still going to their other class periods and getting that instruction there.
And also, I followed up on that when I learned of that too, and talked with Ms. Smith. We've had it a few times at a middle school, I believe, and what Ms. Smith told me was that the students then were remotely coming into a classroom, so it wasn't like they went in and just sat for a period, but they did have to combine some classrooms, and they were using, we don't have an auditorium, so I'm not sure if I remember exactly which classroom they were using, Ms. Smith, but you want to come and give an overview of what's happened at the middle school for the coverage. And then that way, I'm not paraphrasing and losing some of the content.
So what happens at the secondary building for coverage, which is different than the elementary, is when a person is gone, then they look to each period to see who's available to cover for there. So it's different each period. So it's not like somebody steps out and covers a day. So they look for each period. And some periods are just more people who have prep time than on other periods. So they might be able to cover 5 of 7 periods and not be able to cover 2 with somebody in the building or somebody that's come in. And so then sometimes what happens then, it would be the principal, or they'll get one person to cover a couple things, and they would go into the gymnasium where they set up for lunch, and they would have, in the same spots, and they would have those kids come in there with their Chromes. The kids would do their assignments on their Chromes and doing it, and we have possibly a principal, in there with them, watching them, because that we don't have other people in there to do it. So it's not a full day thing ever, but it's usually, and it doesn't even happen every day. The principals are letting me know when it happens, and it will happen 4 periods at a time, but it's really not, it's not happening frequently, but it has happened, and it's our least desirable thing to do. But we can't leave kids in a room without people to watch them. So.
Thank you.
If you
I
pause
would
for a
just
minute,
add
I'll
on.
find out if there are any other board members, or are there any board members that have additional questions? And then-
Yes. All right. Okay, there we go. Sorry, got to get that to work. Okay, so Mr. Milborn, so I guess my biggest question, just in concern for the special ed departments across the scope of the district, I know teachers being out of the buildings is one part of it, and I know there's the substitute shortages, but first of all, can you just touch on, for the paraeducators, how those fill rates are, and are we getting those filled? Because I know we already have a shortage of paras, so what are we doing there?
Yeah, our fill rates in the past for paras have been about 18 to 20%, and right now we're at about 9 or 10%.
Gotcha. And then, how many paras are we just generally short, let alone filling rates?
Like how many postings do we have?
Yeah.
I could find that data for you. I wouldn't
Okay.
want to say something incorrect off the top of my head.
Okay. That's just my biggest concern is I know there are special ed teachers that are going to have to fill in paraeducator roles, and that's not fair to them.
We've done multiple orientations, but I wouldn't want to tell you how many are still hanging out there without going in the system and looking at it.
Okay.
Questions from other board members?
Yeah, I guess I have a question, and it came up a number of times, folks were talking, and then this, I don't know if there's a concept, we even asked a little bit about, what does contact tracing look like for us? What does that look like for your team? What are you doing? Something gets identified. I kind of hate that concept that somehow numbers are fabricated, because we have a requirement to contact trace, a requirement to this, because those numbers go beyond us, the county and the CDC, so maybe explain that.
I will start with, I will agree with that perception that things are getting falsified or incorrect due to, I can't even tell you how many hours our contact tracers have put into that. I got a call during my daughter's birthday party, during her soccer game. We got SAMs working all weekend, working their tails off on contact tracing. And so when I hear that, I do get a little emotional because it's frustrating. However, the process looks like this. Generally an employee will tell their supervisor. But we kind of have 3 processes based on how the information comes to us. Actually, we have 4. Employee will tell their supervisor tells us, we start a process. Employee gets flagged on the symptom tracker, we identify the school, we start there. Employee tells someone else, we hear it through the grapevine, we call, track it down. And then we've had a few instances where the county health department has called us. Those have been more, not confirmed, but more exposures, where they call us and say, hey, Joe's been exposed, is he at school today? And we pull the teacher out. Once that happens, we meet with the employee. And so let's just say it's you, Troy. The contact tracer would say, Troy, the first thing you need to do is contact your primary care health professional, right? The second thing I need you to do is to fill out this sheet. And what this sheet is, it's a 72-hour timestamp, right? And so it's your first day of symptoms, who were you around? And then it's 48 hours previous to that, who were you around? And the questions are, who do you know you were less than 6 feet, more than 15 minutes? Who are you for sure? Who possibly could have been there? And then who was in the general vicinity, right? And so The employee will write that down. And really what the contact tracer does is they go into that middle column of the possibles and they question that person. You know, Troy, you marked Jill down as a possible. Now, if Troy signs a release, I can say to Jill, what do you think? And Jill, we go with the employee's thought. So if they say, yep, I was close, okay, Jill, you're going to quarantine. Okay. Now we say, were you both wearing masks? Because now we can provide you the mask credit. When it comes to contact tracing students, which is more Mr. Hamilton's area, but I know about it, we have to use a little bit more information because you can't necessarily rely on younger kids to remember 3 days prior, let alone 3 hours prior to what they were doing. And maybe teenagers. I don't know. My daughter's 5, so I could just tell you a kindergartner would be hard. So that's where we have to go back and look at seating charts and things like that. And we do everything. We have principals and contact tracers out there with like tape measures, checking cameras. I mean, it can be extensive, and especially on the student side, it can be extensive. On the employee side, you know, we trust our employees, and we trust that they're telling us the truth, and they have pretty good recollection of the events. Does that help?
Yeah.
So once we get that information, then we have a matrix of communication. And so we always communicate exposed people face to face if we can, or with a phone call. And then we communicate with the people in the vicinity and within the building in different methods depending on how many times they've been communicated with and what about.
Okay. Okay. You can go again now, Jill.
Right. So, Mr. Bromberg, or excuse me, Mr. Milborn, how many teachers did we have out today that needed coverage? I know we've been talking about in general, but where do we get to I guess my overall concern is, we know from the last few meetings, we've had several people, including the CBA president and other teachers, come and talk about the stress that they're currently under. On top of that, with all these absences and not being able to fill the substitutes, when do we as a district get to that breaking point where we don't want to break the system because of substitutes when our positivity rate is so low? It's that fine balancing act.
That kind of brings up a good question that we've also been thinking about with this, because in talking to a lot of my colleagues on the Iowa side, many of the school districts have deemed their staff essential workers. So we know that our police, our fire, our health, and our city workers here in Council Bluffs, and a lot of our school districts around, as I talked with superintendents this week, have all deemed them as essential workers just to prevent that breaking point. So if a teacher is exposed, if a cafeteria worker is exposed, you know, with the essential worker, if they fall under that classification or critical employee, as I think the governor terms it that way, they do come back until they either test positive or they have 2 or more symptoms. And so that is an option as a district that we've elected not to use, but could be something that we use to try to help ensure that we don't let the system break. So that's a really good piece that as a board, we could have a conversation around that. But that is the piece that I'm finding other districts are all using that we are not, to help keep that system from breaking.
Well, right now where we have, I don't know if you want to share those numbers you shared earlier about out in quarantine, but I mean, other
Right.
districts are saying, yeah, quarantine, you're going to be at work until you get,
That's correct.
until you have a incident.
In talking with one of the districts that are shifting to that, they are partnering with their hospital to do the testing for them. And that way that when someone is exposed, they are then paying for their test to send them to the test. If the test comes back negative, instead of waiting the full 14 days, they return to work. The other piece is if it is an exposure but not a spouse that the exposure comes from, then they return to work until they see and monitor their symptoms. So that is something that a lot of our districts around have all gone to try to lessen that burden, because right now we have 60-something teachers out on quarantine or under investigation, and that would be really helpful to have them in the classroom, and then the shortage the gap would not be as big. That's a really great question to shoot at.
Yeah, no, that's definitely potentially an option. And my head then goes to that extra stress on those teachers that, yeah.
Pardon me?
Ones who are having to cover, make up that difference.
Yes. It would be most helpful because as you saw from data earlier in the workshop, we've had 0% that's really come back through school exposure that ever really then were tested positive for COVID. And so some of the data we've been tracking, because we have, for those watching, we have about 400, I probably should pull this out because I will start I want to be factual and I want to make sure that we are citing the data correctly.
This one?
Yeah, there we go. We've had 439 teachers that have been quarantined or under investigation. And when we look at school exposures, we've had 0 that have had a positive case from that quarantine. And when we look at those that were community exposures, which was over 60, we had 6, 1.4% of that. And then when we look at home exposures, though, where we had 44 staff members, we did have 11, 2.5%, that tested positive, had a positive case from the exposure. So it is a consideration that many of our school districts are using, that we have not yet elected to enter into. And it's something for us to give consideration so that we can ease the stress off of the other staff members that are reporting every day and then covering classes.
No, I don't mean to correct you, that's all staff, that number was all staff.
Okay, all staff, not just teachers. Okay.
So we've had, well, we're saying we've had 60 staff members total who've been exposed in the community.
Yes.
Or exposed by the community, some of the community.
Somewhere there was an exposure.
6 of those came back positive. Had 44 that were exposed at home, and a higher percentage of those came back positive, probably because they're right there. So 11.
Mr. Arthur, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It would actually be 66, so you need to add those two numbers.
We add the ones
Okay.
that were positive.
Okay.
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 I'm
And so
sorry.
then we had 55 that were exposed at home, and 11 of those came back positive. And we had 36 who had an exposure at school, 0 came back positive from that. And then we still got another 280 or so right now pending investigation. Is that kind of how you read this? That the
Right now,
PUI
or
yeah.
this is year to date?
That's year to date, okay. So right now, we just have those 60 or whatever that are quarantined. They're probably, we call those as pending investigation.
Yes.
Okay.
61, yes.
Okay. Okay. So it's great to see that in school, our staff isn't contracting this from inside the schools. I know there's been this discussion that we even talked about earlier about if kids go back to their homes, what happens in the community? Does that drive that greater positivity rates? When our kids are here and they're, at least for the time we have them, socially distanced as best they can, wearing masks, doing all the right things, and being educated, as best we can versus having them at home, where that's a little sketchier all around. And potentially a chance to get exposed. Higher risk is the word, yeah.
And I would
There we
just
go.
always,
Sketchy.
I would always
It
temper
sounds bad.
that with two comments. I say this a lot. I'm not a doctor and I'm not an epidemiologist. So when we mark them as school exposed or household exposed, that's how they're first reported to us. They call, or they're on the symptom tracker, they say, someone in my house has COVID. So we mark them as exposed, and then we track them all the way to see if they've cleared or if they test positive from there.
Okay, so these aren't, we didn't say, oh no, that was a home one, or that was a this. They mark it, and then we follow it to its endpoint regardless.
Yes. I think it would be, I think it'd be really hard with the community spread the way it is to say where it's coming from. This is our best guess based on the tracking that we have. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if this would be your area, but it was mentioned in the public participation about bus drivers. Have we had any issues with the shortage of bus drivers due to COVID?
It's not my area.
But I'm going to see, Mr. Hamilton's on the Google Meet, and I'm going to see if he knows, because I had not heard of that. So, Mr. Hamilton?
I couldn't quite hear his exact question. What was his exact question?
Mr. Hamilton, I was just asking if, it was mentioned in public participation that there were some bus drivers that were coming down with COVID, and I just wondered if we'd experienced a shortage or stress on bus drivers at this point.
I think bus drivers is one of those things, like teachers, there's always a concern whenever anybody goes out. These are first student numbers to report, but we are in constant communication with first student, and their percentages are probably lower than ours. I believe they've had one bus driver all year who's gone out COVID positive. They've had a couple, I think 4 or 5 others who have been exposed, but that is the extent of their numbers. But they are always a very cyclical position, so they're always looking for bus drivers. So, as far as COVID related, that's where their numbers are.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I would say, it's interesting, kind of the question you had asked, and kind of maybe Dr. Miller's take on it was more, I think, where we look at the impact that it would have on, if we said, oh, no, staff, you're essential, and you go back to work. Because I think that's like somehow balancing also the mental health aspect of requiring someone to go back who's freaking out already, and also having to go with their home probably being quarantined, which I think is a bad kind of case all around. And versus the impact on the school environment, then if we do have situations where we are not able to manage as well as we can for periods of time because of the limited numbers of staff. I guess I wish people would maybe give us some grace a little bit on that from the public side, because somehow you're trying to balance those two things, which I don't think we want to go to a place where we say, yeah, sorry staff, you need to be at here until you come up positive, and then oh my gosh, then we got to get everybody cleared out of the room because you were just positive, or however that would work. I think we're trying to be maybe too cautious, but I think that's also a good thing for our community when everything around it seems to be blowing up. And I guess I want to say to the staff, I know you guys have been working really hard on this, and just, thank you for all you're doing daily, both in the classroom and behind the scenes to try to make this work. And maybe we should communicate more to the community about what's going on, how we attack this every day. Maybe that's where this breakdown is, because I'm slightly a little bit upset by the fact that there's all this talk behind the scenes, and I understand where that comes from. It comes from fear, right? And it comes from hearing things from somebody who's mad, and then it goes to somebody else, and they get upset, and then they share it with their friend, who just runs with it like it's gospel. But at the same time, I do think the efforts we're putting in daily to try to guarantee that we're complying, those things need to be shared. People do need to know kind of what it looks like. And I saw some reports out of one of the Catholic schools, and they sent everybody that they had as a student, as a family, got a report. Hey, here's what we're looking at today. We had a couple kids came down with this. We have a couple teachers out. They just went through their whole thing, and then they had a nice positive message on there. I was like, that was a nice little message about what's going on. I'm sure people would still disagree with it, but I mean, at least it was some information shared that talked about what their positivity rates looked like that day. and what they were doing to try to keep people safe, you know. And I know we do that when we have a class exposure. You know, I mean, we see those, and or we'll have a school thing, maybe there's some kind of sharing. But is there something where we can communicate better as a school district as a whole, what we're doing? I don't know. But I feel like maybe we combat as much fear as we can by just being open and transparent about what's going on within guidelines of, you know, HIPAA. But knowing that, let people know, here's what we do every day to try to affect this. You know, and like give us some grace, and we will try to give our staff as much love and grace as we can to try to make this all work, you know, right now.
Well said, Mr. Arthur.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milbourne. At this time, I'm going to invite Mr. John Stile to come to the podium and present an overview of our 2020-2021. I don't know what he's doing. He's popping up, he's popping down, he's always trying to get on the right screen. It seems like from our first presentation to our last presentation, we all center around talking about the effects of COVID. And you will see John again really talk about what a year this has been, even on enrollment. Mr. Stile, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Murillo. It is my pleasure to present to you this year the Certified Enrollment Report for 2020-21. In the age of COVID, we do have some positive news. One, the open enrollment for this year is up 23 to 302, which is an all-time high for this district. So our open enrollment in is at an all-time high. Our open enrollment out is also down 10 from the previous year. These are really, really good indicators. Finally, for the first time ever in Council Bluffs history, we had students that were virtual that were reported as our students. This is pretty amazing. This, as you can see on this graph, that's all-time high. I attribute this to all the work that's been done by staff and by administration to see that trend as it's swinging up. And once again, we are totally trending in the right way for our open and rollout. Certified enrollment. With the state of Iowa, this is a weighted financial count that includes additional factors beyond just counting bodies. I'll give you a minute to kind of read those sub-bullets because they are all contributing factors to the actual weighted count, which the weighted count is not bodies in a seat. This is straight from the state website, and I've kind of highlighted two items here for you. One is our weighted actual enrollment is 8,882.8. Again, remember, it's weighted count. We don't have a 0.8 student out there. That is down 239.29 students from the previous year. I also want to highlight the preschool enrollment. It's down 30 from the previous year. But there is some really good news over the last 4 years. If you look by this data, if you look over the last 5 years, we were trending up and going in the right direction. But something happened that made us trend down this year. COVID. And we know that where all of these students have gone, we expect that they're going to come back next year. Our pre-K enrollment is down 30.5 students. Our kindergarten enrollment is down 79 students from the previous year. Our homeschool enrollment is up 100. It is my personal opinion that we will gain all of these students back, and we should expect our kindergarten class next year to be very large. But this isn't just our trend on being down this year. The AA average is down 1.73 throughout the AA coverage. Nationally, students are down. Our UEN districts, every one of them is down a certain percentage. There are some districts that are down over 1,000 students. I would open the floor to questions.
Questions from the board?
So I know that if Dean were here, he would say this is gonna be an expense of like $1 million, I don't know what, 500,000 or something like that next year, 1.6 million. And we're also, I mean, I can't imagine when we get to the end of the year how expensive this is gonna be with, you know, I was looking at the cost of subs and when I was reviewing the warrants, and that was, you know, 100,000 plus a month, you know, and maybe it was more than that. I think it was 123. But as we're having listening, obviously this is going to lead to some tightening next year. Do we anticipate some of these kids will come back spring? I mean, is there any way to, is the government, or is the state of Iowa giving any leeway on this, on count?
No.
Just pure, okay.
No, what we have talked about and the UEN really spoke about was kind of a hold harmless year, but we won't be able to really pursue that until we get into the legislation gets back. And so once that they take back up in January, we can push a little bit more. The one positive thing that we do have is we passed the budget guarantee. So we're down a little over 1.6 million because of this decrease, but with the 1%, we know we have 640, even though we had a decrease, that will increase. So that's a real positive. It is a concern, the pre-K and the kindergarten. But we do believe that Dr. Matthews has called every family and talking with them. We also know that our homeschool students are usually right around 100, and maybe a little like 102 or whatever, and it jumped over 80 students. So hoping that when there is a vaccine and everybody feels comfortable that they'll send their students back, that would be a real plus for us. The concern is you're paid in the rear. So we're going to have 1 year that we're down. And so it will mean that we'll have to look at budgets and we'll have to look through. But the COVID dollars did help. We are using COVID dollars to help with substitutes. We're using COVID dollars to help with some other things. So, and plus we already budgeted for substitutes this year, and we did not use all of those dollars last year because we went out early. So that helps kind of offset where you're seeing those high numbers. Because we've added paying teachers for subbing for periods and those type of things that we had not done in the past in some areas. So I know that we will have to take a good look at the budget, and but we also believe that we'll do a really high amount of recruiting efforts in the spring. Diane has done a really good job of working with the elementary students. the elementary schools to get the kindergarten students back and to increase that enrollment. If you remember, each year we were ticking up in kindergarten. So it's something that we'll work really hard with the principals of the buildings and the kindergarten teachers to really reach out to families this year.
What does our outreach look like? I guess the students who've elected to become homeschooled this year maybe hadn't in the past, to ensure they have, I guess, resources or proper planning to keep those kids on track should they choose to come back.
Yeah, it's something that I know our principals have talked about, calling each one of those families to see. I can tell you that our elementary principals and staff really would love to see, I have a few elementary principals that we'd love to have all back, because we know that then we can really reach them and ensure that they're getting high quality instruction. But it is something that we can invite them personally, and it would be another outreach to ensure that maybe we could get them to come back into the schools next year.
Did we see a trend, like high school kids, moving out? Is there besides pre-K and kindergarten, is there a trend or was it just across the board? And do we know where those that didn't go homeschool, was there a trend where a majority went to one place over another?
Yes, great question, Ms. Hudak. Mr. Hamilton's team, because every time a student enrolls in another district, we send transcripts. So we have every student accounted for but one. And the reason I say one is we sent the transcript and then that school district said they've already left here. So it's a real high mobility issue going on. But we lost 166 to Nebraska. That was one of the largest areas that I was very concerned about. And I didn't know if that happened because of, pardon me? They went all remote, or they moved because of finances. When, areas closed, that's right. What I was told was, yes, the mobility, and they moved back to where family is, so that they could have a place to go back to, as I began to dig into that. And then we saw a large number throughout Iowa. 11 went to Sioux City. Some we saw a large group go to Waterloo. So we could track where the students went. So it is really helpful for Tim's team to be able to do that for us. So we do know where they went, but it is scattered all over. Onesie, twosies. The largest area was Nebraska.
Any additional questions? If not, thank you, Mr. Stile.
Thank you.
We appreciate the report. Now we come to our resolutions portion of the meeting. First up is the SBRC spending authority request. Is there a motion?
I can move to approve request from the SPRC for a modified supplemental amount for limited English proficiency of $252,937.08 for 162 English limited students served beyond 4 years, and open enrollment out of $842,912 for 119.9 students open enrollment out on fall 2020 certified enrollment, but not on the fall 2019 certified enrollment.
Thank you. We have a second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none before us, we have a resolution to the SBRC for a spending authority request. Mrs. Ostrowski, would you please call the roll? If you would, please. Not yet. There we go.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Dr. Andres?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Arthur? No, we already know.
LaFurla.
Sorry. Ms. Hudak?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla.
Yes. Sorry, Mr. LaFurla. And Mr. Cavallo.
Yes. And the resolution has been approved. We have now first reading for some policies. Is there a motion?
I can move to approve the first reading of policies 625 high school graduation requirements as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
So this was just, looks like adding of CE classes into these, is that correct?
This is a follow-up to the information that was in Friday Notes a couple of weeks ago. Before the pandemic hit, we had started to study basically how we were adding flexibility in high school graduation requirements and better alignment with Iowa Western programming. If you recall, last year we made some adjustments to fourth year English to give students more options in their fourth year of English. 2 years ago, we did the same thing with science. Math was the next choice. We examined all of the UEN school districts in Iowa and their graduation requirements for math and found that we were the only school district in the state and among the largest that required 3 lockstep units of math. almost all of them required the first 2 units of math and then gave an option. Some only require Algebra 1 and then provide options. So we worked with math curriculum specialists and NEDVED, math teachers, high school principals, counselors, took the information to the School Improvement Advisory Committee, and the recommendation we're making tonight is that we leave our first 2 math sequences the same. All students will take Algebra 1, all students will take geometry, but their 3rd year of math, they will have some choice. The vast majority of our students will most likely probably continue to take Algebra 2. But some students may opt to take technical math concurrent enrollment, which is the required class for almost all of the certificate programs at Iowa Western. Some students may elect to take our consumer math or our financial literacy class that is much more personal finance related, while others will want to take statistics or calculus or trig or any of those upper level classes. So it partially codifies what we have been doing in terms of upper level math, but creates additional pathways for students who want that D+1 while they're still in high school. So that's the why.
If there are no further questions, before us now is a resolution to approve the first reading of policy 625. Mrs. Starski, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Shuyak?
Yes.
Dr. Albrecht?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Yes. And the resolution has been approved. For us now, we have a naming request.
Yeah. I'll move to approve the request to name the practice track and field at Thomas Jefferson High School as the Doug Mulig Track and Field at Thomas Jefferson High School after longtime coach and teacher Doug Mulig.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Sure.
So I've asked Ms. Ostrowski to join me at the podium, and I want to thank Mr. McGlade for bringing this to our attention. And Ms. Ostrowski has kind of led this journey, so I certainly would like you to talk about the journey and let us honor this individual tonight.
You bet. Something not related to COVID whatsoever. Yes, I was pleased to facilitate a committee per our district policy on any requests to name facilities after an individual. So we brought together a group of committed community members who helped us talk through this recommendation that we ultimately made to Dr. Murillo for you tonight. Mr. Doug Mulig began his teaching career in 1972, teaching journalism and history for over 38 years. I know by talking to him that teaching is his first love, it's his greatest joy as a professional. However, he retired in 2010 but continued to touch students' lives through coaching and has been doing that for about 49 years. He's coached football, and I hear that maybe one of you might have had him as a coach back in the day. And he's also, and more recently, been known as a tremendous track and cross-country coach, again, for about 49 years, impacting so many students over many generations. And I think also he's indicated that he might recognize a few of you at this table from his coaching in track or in cross-country. Mr. Mulig is here this evening with his wife, Linda, and also Dr. Freidenberg and Mr. Detterding from Thomas Jefferson. And Mr. Mulig, would you come forward and allow us to recognize you in advance of the board's consideration of this request?
My wife is here, and she probably has more to do with me being able to coach because she took care of the kids for many years, and then she became a para at Gunn, ran the library. And while she was doing that, she was the, what do you call it? The support service person of the year. She's a tremendous person, and without her, I couldn't have been in the classroom with John or helped David cuss at me, probably, no, he never cusses. I was the one probably was doing the bad stuff in football, or Kyle in track and cross country, or Chris in track. Plus, I was fortunate to coach Troy's son in track, and I did teach Dave's twins in history. I was hired as a teacher, not as a coach. I was hired as a journalism teacher and a newspaper advisor, and that's what I am. I think when I coach, I teach. I'm a teacher first. This is amazing. I didn't think it would happen. Anything like this would ever happen. When Diane called me, I said, I'm humbled. And then I said, well, okay, what's going to happen? And she, well, you guys go to the school board. And then I named these people, and I said, well, that doesn't guarantee anything with them. They know what I'm like. And I guess I just, it's neat that, my wife can be here, and I can be here. I have 2 kids. One's in Overland Park, Margie, and she went to AL, that a good school too. And my son went to AL too. They wouldn't have much to do with me. And my son Grant, and they did sports there. And I can remember when the field was, there was no track. Coach Bob Nielsen would take stakes out from the goalpost and make a 400. And that was our track. We never did get any shin splints though, so it was a good deal. Then I think the parents at Thomas Jefferson demanded a track, and we got one. It was because of the parents. The parents and kids at TJ are the best ones you could ever hope for. And seeing people get into positions like this is just amazing. Teaching John in freshman history. I didn't have hair then, John, either, but I had maybe a little with David. But
I don't think so.
I don't know. That might have been me giving you headbutts too much. And you had a helmet on, I didn't. 2 people that have been very important in my life as coaches, and there have been a lot of coaches have been great at TJ. You can go start with Bob Harden and so forth down the line. Some of you wouldn't even know what I'm talking about. But Bob Nielsen, when I was at 7th year, I just couldn't afford to be teaching. Wasn't making any money, debts, and I was going to quit. I don't know what I was going to do because I probably wasn't going to make any more money going into journalism, being a newspaper reporter. Made less probably, plus working 3 more months. And he said I couldn't. You can't quit. Can't. I won't tell you why, but he told me you can't. And so I stuck around for another 42. And, I don't know if there'll be a 50th. There may or may not. And then John Kinsel. Probably, he coached cross country with me for 10 years. So if that's not an oxymoron, I don't know if that's the right term for it. We had 2 linemen coaching cross country. 2 offensive linemen, and we were pretty offensive at times. And he did it because he was afraid if he didn't come out and help me, I think it was about 1995 or so, he said, you're going to have a heart attack, Doug. I know the way you are with these people, going crazy. And he got me through. And he's a guy that had 2 national championship rings from Nebraska football, 3 Orange Bowl rings, graduate of TJ. And I know I can go forever. I'm a filibuster guy. My wife is now telling me to get out of Dodge. But seeing people go through that place and the support that people give each other, I couldn't ask for a better place to be. So lucky that a guy named Don Shortley an activities director, and Gaylord Anderson, the principal, hired me as a teacher, not as a coach. They saw I played football at Midland, Lutheran College. I still call it that, not Midland University. That's bad. But they gave me a chance, and I don't know if I deserved it. And then eventually, even that year, I started helping with football, and I did that for 10 years. My wife was so glad I got out of that because I stopped cussing so much. And I asked Bob, I twisted his arm, and he let me start coaching track in '76. And I think for about 3 years, I volunteered with coaching track and football, both. But that was more fun than anything, just being there. And in track, if Bob is back in this fall, he always tells me he's not, but he always comes back. That'll be 46 years. And I've done 36 across country. And Kyle, I promise you, I will try to get that fly pattern in so you can catch the pass. Okay? He's one of my best runners ever. Okay. Thank you very much. It's very humbling, and I know I don't deserve anything, but I'll take it. Just put up a phonics sign because nobody will be able to pronounce Muley. Thank you. Sure. John.
I've asked Mr. Mueller if he would like his former students to pose in a picture with him real quick. And as he does that, I guess I would be remiss if I didn't say the specific name that has been proposed for the practice track and field at Thomas Jefferson High School there on campus is the Doug Mueller track and field at Thomas Jefferson High School. And we will find a way to commemorate it beautifully there on campus. All right, how about a picture?
Should we proceed with the vote?
It'd be a good idea, it'd be a good idea if we get through the vote here, and then we will.
That's right.
Vote quick.
Oh, I thought it
No, it's not a done deal yet.
Well denied.
Okay, before us now is a resolution to name the Thomas Jefferson Track and Field in honor of Mr. Doug Mueller. Ms. Ostrowski, would you please call the roll?
Yes, may I ask who seconded the motion?
It's John.
Okay.
Mr. Minchell.
I will open online voting. Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Minchall?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Congratulations, Mr. Mueller. I wish I was there, yes.
Thank you, Chris.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Ms. Hudak?
Congratulations, Jess.
Mrs. Dyer?
Yes, and the resolution has been approved.
Dustin, thank you for being here. He's got a long drive back to Lincoln. That's amazing.
Right here facing Celsius
Okay.
Information. We know they're smiling.
Kelsey's daughter, one of my newspaper people and football player.
Yes, I am. So congratulations. Yes. Awesome.
Thank you so much for everybody who worked on this project. I felt a lot of passion, and it's well deserved. We have one last resolution before our consent agenda regarding the IASB convention. Is there a motion?
Move to approve attendance and payment of related expenses for David Kozire to attend virtually the IASB convention.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, before us we have a resolution to approve the attendance and payment for those attending the IASB annual convention. Mrs. Ostrowski, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Mitchell?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Ms. Shuda?
Yes.
Mr. Kazak?
Yes, and the resolution has been approved. Before us now is our consent agenda involving approval of special education contracts outside of the Council Bluffs Community School District, those being ISD, Sioux City, and Heartland Schools, some personnel actions, and also claims and accounts. Is there a motion?
Yeah, I can move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, before us now is the approval of our consent agenda. Ms. Ostrowski, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Ms. Shuda?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Mitchell?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the resolution has been approved. With that, our regular workshop business meeting has been concluded and we are adjourned. We will next be taking up our annual meeting. I'm calling to order this annual meeting of the Council Bluffs Community School District Board of Directors. Ms. Ostrowski, would you please call the roll?
Yes, I'm getting to the right screen.
Sure.
Dr. Ogres?
Present.
Mr. Mitchell?
Present.
Mr. McGlade?
Present.
Mr. LaFurla?
Here.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Ms. Shuda?
Here.
Mr. Kazire?
Present. Before us now is the approval of our agenda. Is there a motion?
Yeah, I'll move approval of our annual meeting agenda.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And the approval of our agenda has been resolved. Before us now, do we have a motion to select a temporary chair?
Yeah, I can move that we select Diana Ostrowski to be the temporary chair to administer the oath of office to the newly elected president, vice president, and I guess run us through the election of those.
Right.
Yes.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Before us now is a resolution to approve Ms. Ostrowski as our temporary chair. Would you please call the roll?
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Mitchell?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Ms. Shuda?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the resolution has been approved. Mrs. Ostrowski, the chair is yours.
Sounds like you are, Laura.
All right, good. It is now the time during the annual meetings when we open the floor for a motion regarding.
Move to appoint Chris LaFurla as president of the school board.
Second.
We have a motion. Oh, sorry.
Not you.
That's Diane's job.
Busy.
What's the second? There's been a motion to nominate Mr. LaFurla as president of the board, and a second. We'll now take the vote. I'll open online voting. Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Mitchell?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Ms. Shuda?
Yes.
Already got that.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Now it is time for the agenda item related to the office of vice president. Is there a motion regarding this matter?
I would like to nominate Dave Kozire as vice president of the council.
Second that.
Regarding the vice president. And that was by Dr. Osgood and Mr. Arthur. I ask for,
Additional.
regarding this motion.
Yeah. Dave, you're up for that?
I would actually ask to be considered to be nominated for the vice president role.
So that would be added to the nominees, cast of nominees.
Is that how it works?
Yes.
Does she have to have a separate
Actually, there
Vote
should
on
be a
that?
second for the whole body. There would be an amendment, it should be or a friendly amendment to include additional nominees to the role of vice president. And then it would be a vote for each of the nominees. The majority then being the one elected.
Dr. Osgood, can we say motion to nominate Mr. Desire as president? Will you accept that as an amendment?
I nominated him for vice president. Yes. So you're asking me to make an amendment to the motion to add Ms. Shudak as a candidate for vice president?
Or a second individual can nominate. He's self-nominated, so there would be a second.
So there has to be a second
Okay,
nomination.
is there a second to the self-nomination for Ms. Shudak to be the vice president of the board?
Second.
For discussion.
So then when you vote, you must just go through each candidate? Or how does that work?
Yes. Yes.
So I suppose if we could just hear from both of the people that wanted to seek the nomination, would probably be what I would want to hear.
Defer? Okay, fine. Thank you. I'm willing to serve in the position, to support Chris. From the standpoint of continuity of leadership during these challenging times, I think I would be able to support Chris in a unique way of being president these past couple of years and helping him move forward in his new position as president.
Mr. Kozire, I'm interested in being the board vice president, also to assist Chris in these challenging times. I think from what I've heard over the last few months in the community, that the district is looking for diversity when it comes to different topics, and I think that I can bring a different point of view when it comes to bringing items into agendas and discussing those items with Dr. Murillo and Chris. And so that's why I'm interested in running.
I would propose that you vote on the first motion. That was Mr. LaFerla or Mr. Desire as the vice president. Open online voting. Motion is by Dr. Ogret.
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Moonsaw? Mr. Slade?
No.
Mr. LaFerla?
Yes.
Mr.
No.
Mr.
Yes. No.
No.
Would you please stand? And Mr. LaFerla, if you're standing, we won't know. But please raise your right hand. I'm going to read this statement and I'll ask you to reply, I will. Do you solemnly swear that you support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Iowa, and that you will faithfully and impartially, to the best of your ability, discharge all duties of the office of President and Vice President respectfully of the Board of Education in the Council Bluffs Community Schools, Township of Kings, County of Potawatomi, State of Iowa, as now or hereafter required by law? And we see Mr.
I will.
I will.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I'll turn the meeting over to you, Mr. LaPerla.
Thank you, Mrs. Strauski. Before we move on with the rest of the agenda, I just want to thank Mr. Meyer for his serving as the board president for the last 2 years. You've served with great integrity and led the board with a passion for our schools and with the highest ethical standard. And I just have respect for you and thank you for your leadership. Next on the agenda, we have public participation, opportunity for members of the public to address the board. Are there any members of the public who wish to address the board at this time? I can't see, so I might have to have some help here.
I don't believe so.
Over here.
Okay. Next, we move to our resolutions. We have a resolution to appoint our board secretary. Is there a motion?
I would move to reappoint Dean Wilson to the board secretary and treasurer position for the 2020-21 year.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I believe Ms. Ostrowski is still acting as our secretary this evening. Is that correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Ms. Ostrowski, would you please call the roll?
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Minchon?
Yes.
Ms. Shudak?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. LaFerla?
Yes.
You laughed. Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Dr. Ogret?
Yes, ma'am.
And now you, Mr. LaFerla.
Yes.
You're doing great, Diane.
And the motion for Mr. Wilson. Carries. Next, we move on to resolution, our 2020-2021 board meeting dates. Is there a motion?
And I can move that the board approve to hold the 2020-2021 meetings to the Board of Directors of the Council Bluffs Community School District on the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays of each month, except in November, December, June, July, and August, when the board will only meet once as presented.
Second.
Thank you. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Ostrowski, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Ms. Shudak?
Yes.
Mr. Minchon?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Dr. Ogret?
Yes.
And Mr. LaFerla.
Yes. And the motion to approve our 2020-2021 board meeting date is approved. And that concludes our business for this evening. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.